My name is Tom, and this happened 3 summers ago when my wife Jennifer and I took our kids to Ocean City for what was supposed to be a relaxing family vacation. Our son Max was 9 at the time, and our daughter Lily had just turned 6. We'd been planning this trip for months, saving up for a nice rental house right on the beach instead of settling for some cramped hotel room inland. The rental looked perfect in the photos. A 3-bedroom beach house with a wraparound deck, just 50 yards from the water. The listing said it had been recently renovated and came fully furnished. What sold us was the price. It was almost too good to be true for a week-long stay in peak season. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon in late July. The house looked exactly like the photos: white shingles, blue shutters, and that beautiful deck overlooking the dunes. The owner, a guy named Gary, was supposed to meet us with the keys, but when we got there, he was nowhere to be found. I called his number and it went straight to voicemail. I was about to call again when I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and called out, but got no response. Everything looked clean and well maintained. That's when I noticed the suitcases. There were 2 large black suitcases sitting in the living room, partially unpacked. Men's and women's clothes were folded on the couch, and there was a pair of reading glasses on the coffee table next to an open paperback book. I called Gary again, and this time he picked up. His voice sounded strained, almost nervous. I told him about the luggage and he went quiet for a few seconds before Gary said, "Oh right, the previous guests. They were supposed to check out this morning, but their flight got delayed. They should be gone soon." We decided to walk down to the beach and give the other guests some time to clear out. When we got back to the house around 5 p.m., the suitcases were still there, untouched. The clothes in the suitcases weren't vacation clothes. There were business suits, formal dresses, and expensive-looking jewelry. Everything was folded perfectly, like it had never been worn. And there were no personal items, no toiletries, no phone chargers, no souvenirs. That first night was fine until around 2 a.m., when I woke up to the sound of footsteps above us. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth across the upstairs hallway. I got up and walked to the bottom of the stairs, listening. Someone was going through the furniture upstairs. I climbed the stairs as quietly as I could. The door to the 3rd bedroom, the one where I'd moved the mystery suitcases, was wide open, and I could see a dim light inside. The room was empty, but the suitcases were open, and clothes were scattered across the bed, like someone had been frantically searching through them. But there was nobody in the room, nobody upstairs at all except my sleeping children. The next morning, everything was back to normal. The clothes were neatly folded in the suitcases, the drawers were closed. It was like nothing had happened. That afternoon, I found papers tucked into one of the suitcase pockets: boarding passes, hotel receipts, and rental car agreements. The dates were all from 2 weeks ago. The names on the documents were David and Patricia Morrison. I called Gary again and pressed him for answers. Gary replied very quietly, "I was hoping they'd be gone by now." I asked what he meant, and he went silent for a long time. Finally, he said he'd come by the house that evening to explain everything. Gary showed up around 9 p.m., looking terrible. He told us what had really happened. David and Patricia Morrison had rented the house 3 weeks ago for a romantic getaway weekend. They checked in on a Friday afternoon just like us, but they never checked out. Gary found them on Monday morning when he came by to clean the house. They were in the upstairs bathroom. David was in the bathtub, and Patricia was on the floor beside it. Both had been dead for at least 24 hours. The police ruled it a murder-suicide. Gary explained, "I thought enough time had passed that people would have forgotten about what happened, but I've been getting strange reports from guests ever since footsteps at night, things moving around on their own, and cold spots in the upstairs bathroom." We were furious. Jennifer wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but it was almost 10 p.m. and the kids were asleep. Gary offered a full refund, but admitted it would be nearly impossible to find anything else available. Around midnight, Lily started screaming. I ran upstairs and found her standing in the hallway, pointing at the bathroom door. She was crying hysterically, claiming there were people in there who were hurt and needed help. The bathroom was empty, but the air was ice cold, and there was this metallic smell that reminded me of old pennies. Lily insisted she'd seen a man and a woman in the bathroom. The man was in the big white bowl, and the woman was sleeping on the floor. We brought both kids downstairs to sleep in the living room with us. Every hour or so, we'd hear those same slow, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth upstairs. At around 3 a.m., the footsteps stopped directly above where we were lying. Then we heard what sounded like someone falling, followed by a woman's voice calling out weakly for help. I grabbed a flashlight and crept upstairs one more time. The bathroom door was closed, even though I was sure I'd left it open. I tried the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked, it just wouldn't open, like someone was holding it shut from the inside. I put my ear to the door and heard what sounded like water dripping. Finally, I tried the handle again, and this time the door opened easily. Inside, the bathtub was full of water, crystal clear water, right to the brim, even though the faucet wasn't running. I reached out to touch the water, and it was ice cold. When I looked closely, there were dark spots floating just below the surface that looked almost like drops of blood. But when I looked more carefully, they vanished. The next morning, we packed up and left immediately. A few weeks after we got home, I tried calling Gary again. The number had been disconnected. I looked up the property online and found a news article from a local paper. Gary had been found dead in the rental house 4 days after we left. He'd apparently gone there to do maintenance work and had what the coroner ruled a heart attack. They found him in the upstairs bathroom, slumped over the bathtub. I never told Jennifer about that article, but sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I think about that bathroom and wonder what really happened to David and Patricia Morrison. And I wonder if Gary really died of a heart attack, or if he saw something in that ice-cold water that stopped his heart with fear. My name is Rachel, and this happened last summer during what was supposed to be a relaxing solo trip to Rehoboth Beach. I was 28, recently out of a long relationship, and desperately needed some time to clear my head. I'd booked a small cottage about 2 blocks from the boardwalk for a long weekend. The cottage was perfect small but comfortable, with a little deck and a view of the ocean. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late August, walked down to the beach around sunset with a book and a bottle of wine, and fell into the best sleep I'd had in months. The next morning, I woke up early and claimed a good spot on the beach. I spread out my towel about 50 yards from the dunes and spent the morning reading and dozing in the sun. Around noon, I noticed a man setting up a beach chair about 100 yards down from me. He was older, maybe in his 50s, wearing khaki pants and a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat. He had a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face and he was carrying what looked like a camera bag and a small notebook. Over the next hour, I started to notice that every time I looked up, he was pointing his camera in my direction. He had binoculars that he'd lift to his eyes for long stretches, also aimed my way. I tried to focus on my book, but every few minutes I'd glance over and he'd have those binoculars trained on me. When he saw me looking, he'd quickly lower them and pretend to be writing in his notebook. I decided to test my suspicions. I packed up and moved about 50 yards down the beach. Within 5 minutes, he packed up his chair and moved too, positioning himself at the same distance from me as before. I walked over to where he was sitting, trying to look confident even though my heart was pounding. I asked, "Excuse me, but I couldn't help noticing you've been taking pictures. I hope you don't mind me asking what you're photographing." He looked up at me with this weird smile that didn't reach his eyes. The man replied softly, "Just documenting beach behavior. Fascinating stuff, really. The way people relax when they think nobody's watching." I told him, "Well, I'd prefer not to be in any of your photos. I'm just here to read and relax." He answered, Of course. Though you know, it's a public beach. Technically, anyone can photograph anything they can see." That word technically hung in the air like a threat. I walked back to my spot, but I couldn't relax anymore. Every time I looked over, he was still watching me, still writing in that notebook. Around 3 p.m., I'd had enough. I packed up and started walking toward the boardwalk. As I reached the wooden steps, I turned back and saw him hurriedly packing up his chair. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a busy restaurant, but the damage was done. My peaceful solo retreat had been completely ruined. The next morning, I decided to try the beach one more time, staying closer to the lifeguard stations. For about an hour, everything seemed normal. Then I saw him again. This time, he was positioned up in the dunes, partially hidden behind beach grass, but with a clear view of where I was sitting. He had a bigger camera today, one with a telephoto lens. But worse than that, he wasn't alone. There was another man with him, younger, maybe in his 30s, also with a camera and binoculars. I immediately walked to the lifeguard station. The guard on duty was a college-age kid named Jake, who seemed genuinely concerned when I explained what was happening. Jake asked, "Can you point them out to me?" I looked back toward the dunes, but the two men were gone. We searched through the dunes for several minutes, but there was no sign of them. Jake walked me back to my cottage and gave me his cell phone number, telling me to call if I saw the men again. That afternoon, around 5 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. A man's voice, the same soft voice from the beach, asked, "Did you enjoy your time in the dunes today?" My blood turned to ice. I demanded, "Who is this?" He replied, "Someone who appreciates your dedication to sunbathing. You have excellent form, very photogenic." I hung up immediately and called Jake. He answered on the first ring, and his tone immediately became serious. Jake advised, "Rachel, I think you need to call the police. This has gone beyond beach harassment." A police officer came to my cottage within 20 minutes. Officer Martinez was professional and took my concerns seriously, but he explained that without being able to identify the men or having physical evidence, there wasn't much they could do immediately. The next morning was supposed to be my last day. As I was loading my car, I found something tucked under the windshield wiper, a manila envelope with my name written on it in block letters. Inside were about 24 photographs, all of me on the beach over the past 2 days. The most disturbing photos were close-up shots that showed details of my face and body, captured with a powerful telephoto lens. At the bottom of the envelope was a note. "Thanks for a lovely weekend. Looking forward to seeing you again soon." I called Officer Martinez immediately. He explained, "This is definitely criminal stalking. We'll dust these for fingerprints and see if we can trace where they were developed." The police never found the men. The photos had been printed at a chain store using a self-service kiosk, paid for with cash. The phone number was a burner phone that had been deactivated. I never got any more calls or photos, but I've never gone back to Rehoboth Beach, and I've never taken another solo vacation by the ocean. Sometimes I wonder if those men are still out there, stalking other women on other beaches, violating their sense of safety the way they violated mine. My name is Chris, and this happened to me and my girlfriend Amanda last October, during what was supposed to be a romantic weekend getaway to the Outer Banks. We'd been dating for about 8 months, and Amanda had been going through a stressful time at work. I thought a few days away would be good for both of us. We'd rented a small cabin right on the beach in a remote area about 30 miles south of Duck. The cabin was perfect, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place with a deck that looked out over the dunes. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in mid-October. That first evening, we walked about a mile down the beach, just enjoying being together. As the sun started to set, we found a spot in the dunes and sat together, watching the sky change colors. It was one of those perfect moments. We made dinner together that night and sat on the little deck with candles, talking and laughing until well after midnight. We were woken up the next morning by my phone ringing. The caller ID showed a local number. A man's voice asked, "Is this Chris?" He sounded older, maybe in his 60s, with a slight southern accent. I replied, "Yeah, who's this?" The man explained, "This is going to sound strange, but I think you and your girlfriend might be in danger. Are you staying in the little blue cabin on mile marker 23? I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. He described our cabin perfectly. I asked again, "Who is this?" He answered, "My name's not important. What's important is that you need to get out of there. Today, something bad is going to happen if you stay." The line went dead. Amanda was sitting up now too, looking concerned. I told her about the conversation, and we both tried to make sense of it. How did this person know we were staying there? How did they get my cell phone number? We spent the morning on the beach, walking and collecting shells, but I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was so strong, I could almost feel eyes on me. Around noon, we decided to drive into town to get lunch and groceries. The nearest town was about 15 miles away. As we were walking back to our car after lunch, Amanda grabbed my arm. Amanda whispered, "Chris, don't look back right away, but I think that man in the red baseball cap has been following us." I casually turned to look and saw a middle-aged guy in a red cap about 20 feet behind us, pretending to look at his phone. When he realized I was looking at him, he quickly ducked into a nearby shop. We got in the car and drove back toward the cabin, but I kept checking the rearview mirror. Sure enough, a blue pickup truck stayed behind us the entire way, always maintaining the same distance. When we got back to the cabin, The truck drove past without stopping, but I got a good look at the driver, the same guy in the red baseball cap. That evening, we decided to take a walk on the beach despite feeling uneasy. The sun was setting, and the beach was completely deserted. We walked about half a mile south of our cabin, just talking and trying to shake off the weird feeling from earlier. Amanda stopped suddenly and pointed toward the dunes. Amanda said, "What's that over there? It looks like someone's been digging." I looked where she was pointing and saw what appeared to be a large hole in the sand, partially hidden behind some tall grass. We walked over to investigate, and my stomach dropped when I saw what it was. Someone had dug a grave. It was about 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and maybe 4 feet deep. The sand that had been removed was piled neatly to one side, and there were shovels lying nearby. But what made it truly terrifying was what we found next to the hole: a piece of paper, weighted down with a rock. Written on it in block letters was, "Chris and Amanda, welcome to your final resting place." Amanda started shaking. She asked, "How did they know our names? How did they know we'd find this?" That's when I realized we'd been lured here. The mysterious phone call that morning, the man following us in town, the truck tailing us back to the cabin. It had all been designed to make us paranoid and nervous, to drive us out for a walk where we'd inevitably discover this grave. I grabbed Amanda's hand and we ran back toward the cabin. But as we crested the dune that blocked our view of the house, we saw 3 men standing on our deck. One of them was the guy in the red baseball cap from town. The other 2 I didn't recognize, but they were all wearing dark clothing and seemed to be waiting for us. We dropped down behind the dune and tried to figure out what to do. My phone had no signal. We were too far from any cell towers. The nearest neighbor was at least 2 miles away. We were completely isolated. Amanda whispered, "There's a path through the dunes that leads to the main road. If we can get there without them seeing us, maybe we can flag down a car." We crawled on our hands and knees through the beach grass, trying to stay hidden. Every few minutes, we'd hear voices calling our names from the direction of the cabin. The men had obviously realized we weren't coming back and were starting to search for us. It took us almost an hour to make it to the main road, moving slowly and carefully to avoid making noise. When we finally reached the pavement, we saw headlights approaching and frantically waved down the car. It was an older couple from Virginia who immediately saw we were in distress. The woman let us use her cell phone to call 911, while her husband drove us to the nearest police station. Sheriff Martinez took our report seriously, especially when we told him about the grave and the threatening note. He dispatched several units to our cabin immediately. Sheriff Martinez explained, "We've been tracking a group of men who've been targeting tourists in remote rental properties. This matches their pattern. They select isolated locations, do surveillance on the guests, then try to rob or harm them." The officers found the grave exactly where we'd described it, along with the threatening note. They also found evidence that someone had been living in the woods behind our cabin for several days: food containers, sleeping bags, and binoculars. But the men were gone. They'd apparently fled as soon as they realized we'd escaped and called for help. We never went back to collect our belongings from the cabin. The rental company arranged to have our things shipped home, and we drove back to Virginia that same night. Sheriff Martinez called us a few weeks later with an update. They'd arrested 2 of the 3 men after a similar incident at another remote cabin about 50 miles away. The 3rd man, the one in the red baseball cap, was still at large. Martinez warned, "These guys are professionals. They target couples at isolated rental properties, do surveillance to learn their routines, then create situations designed to separate them from help. You're lucky you stayed together and didn't panic. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if we'd returned to that cabin that night. Maybe they just wanted to rob us. Maybe they had something worse in mind. I try not to think about what that freshly dug grave was really intended for. Amanda and I are still together, but we've never taken another vacation to a remote location. We stick to busy hotels in crowded areas now, places where there are always people around, and help is never more than a phone call away. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that hole in the sand, perfectly sized for 2 people, and the note with our names written in those careful block letters. Someone had planned this carefully, had been watching us, learning about us, preparing for us. The scariest part is knowing that if we'd been just a little less lucky, a little less cautious, our names might have ended up on missing persons reports instead of police statements. And somewhere out there, that man in the red baseball cap is still looking for his next victims.